Democratic senator who got her start here in Washington, representing a district that Trump won. Now, as of this week, she's one of the president's biggest targets. On this week's Capitol Conversation, I sat down with Michigan Democratic Senator Slotkin, who's making waves this week after she and a small group of Democrats called on service members to reject unlawful orders. Thank you, of course, for sitting down with us to talk this week. First off, just going to jump right into it. The president having a pretty a strong reaction to a video you and a few colleagues put out, pretty much telling members of the military to follow their oath of office and to not illegally carry out any orders from higher ups. Just your reaction to the president tweeting out, or trooping out rather, that this is something punishable by death.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, he called for us to be arrested and tried and hanged. And, because he didn't agree with the video we put out. And I think it's really not about the six of us who are the service and veteran members of Congress who put the video together. I think it's about who we are as people and whether we want this to be the tone of our politics. You can disagree with someone without calling for their arrest and hanging. And, I think about our kids watching this and them learning that this is how dialogue, should be, and how terrible that is for our next generation to use that as an example. And I think whoever you are, Democrat, Republican, independent, not interested, whatever, we should all be able to agree that we shouldn't want someone's death if we disagree with them. So I hope it's condemned by people who are on, all sides of issues. And then I think lastly, it certainly felt to me that it was an attempt to intimidate me out of talking about the country that I love and standing up for it. And, this country has given me everything. I mean, I've served in Iraq alongside the military. I've just taken the oath of office many, many times. And nothing's going to scare me out of standing up for the country that I love. So, it wasn't on my bingo card for this morning, and I've appreciated some of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle putting out statements and coming up and talking to me. And but it's definitely changed, and the security situation has definitely changed for me and my team.
And I was just going to follow up personally. How has this affected your day? What do you anticipate? How do you anticipate this impacting your week going back home, being with your family? It sounds like this could have a more dramatic impact.
Yeah, well, of course, my first thought was for my family and then for my staff, people who are in our offices, are just at home. You get a lot of, mentally unwell people who could do crazy things. So we've been in touch with law enforcement. The Capitol Police and the Sergeant of Arms have been, sort of insisting on more security. We've gotten, a huge spike in death threats and intimidation on our phones and on our emails and websites. And, it's just changed the way we think about security. Again, for me, I have been in difficult security situations, but they were abroad in war zones. And I just don't think any of us want a political system, a political discourse that makes it a physical risk to exercise your First Amendment rights. And, we had this conversation as a country just this past fall with what happened with Charlie Kirk. The president himself has been the victim of political violence. So I would just call upon him and everybody to button it up when it comes to threatening violence against people you disagree with.
Would you like to see the president put out a statement there retracting what he said before? We know the White House press secretary did walk back some of what the president said at today's briefing.
Yeah, she tried to play cleanup a little bit, and then he can easily take the tweet down and say something about how he personally regrets it. I understand she's going to say what she wants to say to do a cleanup job, but he's the commander-in-chief. He's the president of the United States. If he doesn't think we should be arrested, tried, and hanged, as he said this morning, he should say that.
You mentioned that colleagues from across the aisle have reached out. Have you heard anything from Leader Thune, for instance?
I've not heard anything from Leader Thune. I was in a room with him today. I have heard from some of my other Republican colleagues.
After the fact, you were in the room with him?
After the fact, I was in the room with him. Yep. I was in the room with a number of my Democrat and Republican colleagues. We had an agriculture meeting, and a couple of my colleagues said something. A couple of them put out statements, which I appreciate. And, we're just looking for our political discourse to be something that our kids would be proud of.
And let's talk about why you and your colleagues felt the need to make this video, to talk directly to members in the military. What are you hearing? What are you seeing that drew you to this particular strategy?
Yeah, we were hearing, all of us who contributed to this video are either former CIA or former military. And we've just been hearing from a huge number of rank and file people in uniform and the intelligence community saying, like, I feel like I'm going to be asked to do something that's not legal. I feel like I'm not sure about whether I'm doing things that are legal, and I'm stressed about that, and I don't know what to do. And they were reaching out.
And so whistleblower complaints.
Just a nervousness, that, hey, my unit is being deployed to Chicago, or my unit is being deployed to North Carolina. I don't know what I'm going to be asked to do. Like, how is this working? I think all we were trying to do was A, speak directly to those folks, and then B, say, hey, you all are trained in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You literally get trained in it in boot camp. And it says very clearly, since World War II, that you can refuse an illegal order if something violates our own laws. And so we restated that. We quoted directly from the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's nothing new. And that seemed to upset people. Now, in the White House in particular. Now, I think for me, there's nothing more fundamental than deploying troops in American cities. I mean, that is a very important conversation for us to be having as Americans. Our whole history as a country, our rebellion from the British is because they had military in our cities and in our streets treating us like crap, right? And so a country with that kind of a history, and the way our founding fathers designed our system was to really, have law enforcement, local law enforcement, take care of local issues and not have the military deployed to our city streets. So I think that's a conversation we should have. I think that the President, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Homeland Security should be open about that conversation. They clearly support it, so let them come to a hearing and talk about that and air that in front of the public. We were also hearing from people who were concerned about the strikes in the Caribbean. We were hearing directly from folks who said, hey, I'm involved in these operations. I'm not sure they're legal. I'm nervous. I'm going to my local JAG officer, my Army or Navy military lawyer, and I'm trying to get top cover because I'm worried I'm going to be held personally liable one day for this. This is what they're asking of us. And this has been reported now widely in the media of folks who are concerned about the legal basis for these things. So we wanted to tell people we heard them and that we support them as folks in uniform. We love the military. I've worked alongside the military my entire life, and I never want the American public to question the intent of the U.S. military.
Based on what these individuals have shared with you or the other Democrats in that video, is there evidence or a suggestion that they have been asked to do anything illegal?
Well, it's not a hypothetical because, the president under his first term in office, asked the Secretary of Defense and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs to bring in the active duty military into Washington, D.C. during peaceful protests, and said, hey, why can't we just, quote, shoot at their legs to disperse them, right? Shooting at unarmed protesters is illegal. And in the book that the former Secretary of Defense wrote, he talks about how they kind of tap danced and maneuvered to get out of the room so that they weren't going to have to implement that order. So it's not a hypothetical that this president has asked his military to do something that's beyond the law. And we just wanted to put down a marker on where we are as Americans, and folks who are in the military swear an oath to the Constitution, not to any one man or any one boss. It is to the Constitution of the United States.
Have you witnessed, from your perspective, this administration, the DOD, the intelligence community violate the law? And do you trust Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, for instance, to uphold the law?
Well, I'm certainly, obviously not in the chain of command, not in the Department of Defense, so I haven't seen anything. It's just the sheer number of people seeking us out and saying like, hey, I'm involved in these operations, but I'm so nervous about the legal basis that I have written kind of a memo and I'm trying to get that approved by my local JAG, or I don't know the legal basis they're using. They haven't shown that to us, and I'm concerned about it because I haven't seen the legal basis myself. So when people are coming and talking to me, and these are people who love the country, they love the military, they want to be senior officers one day. And there was just so many of them.
How would you characterize the quantity?
I think between all of us, there's 6 of us who did the video. Certainly, I can speak for myself and a few others. It's definitely dozens. And I think all of us have our own networks, particularly with younger veterans who I think they're seeing, 17 general officers have been removed from their posts, including the folks in charge of Southcom, the area where all these strikes are going on. The top legal advisor is out from that command. So it's particularly, I think, a younger officer's concern.
And you brought up the Venezuela situation. Obviously, that has been a point of contention here on Capitol Hill. Democrats and Republicans asking for more information from this administration. When was the last time that maybe the Armed Services Committee, Department of Homeland Security Committee, got any sort of intelligence about what exactly is going on there, and what intelligence are you seeking at this point? Yeah,
so again, it's just pretty normal to have the oversight committees, the Armed Services Committee, get a briefing on what's going on. That's been pretty difficult to extricate. They did come up and do one classified hearing. They didn't want to do it publicly, and so I attended that. And the Homeland Security Committee has not had any meetings on the deployment of troops or law enforcement in our cities. And our chairmen of these committees have every ability to have those oversight hearings. We've gotten some intelligence, not everything. We've asked for the standard stuff to be shared with us. When I worked under the Bush administration or the Obama administration, when there were operations abroad, especially when the president has declared there's an armed conflict and he's at war with these groups in the Caribbean, just show the map. Tell us about these groups. What are their names? Right now, that's a secret list based on intelligence that we haven't seen. And then explain to us how it's going. You're going after folks in the Caribbean in boats. Tell us about those operations. Are they getting the folks that you think that they're getting? Are they successful? These are very standard things for anyone who's worked in the intelligence community, working on, let's say, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, those kinds of groups. So we're just asking for the basics, and they have not provided it.
On a lighter note, and on a policy note rather, one of the conversations we were having prior to this kind of blowing up was the healthcare discussion. Obviously, that is what this whole shutdown revolved around, and ultimately there is still supposed to be a bipartisan conversation happening here on Capitol Hill to try and resolve those expiring extended tax cuts. First off, is that bipartisan conversation happening?
So we met yesterday to start figuring out the contours of this health care bill that we will be putting forward, I believe, in December, right, after Thanksgiving. And I think there's a lot of debate about what that bill looks like. Health care is one of the most personal things, to Americans. It's one of the most important things because it's about the health of your kids and how long you're going to live. So that conversation has started. There's a group of folks who are looking at the kind of the big rocks inside that legislation, but I know the minute we're back from Thanksgiving is when that conversation will really heat up.
And are you willing to compromise on some of those reforms that Republicans
Sure.
are pointing to, the caps on income, for instance? Do you think there will be a consensus in the Senate to move forward with an extension, whether that be a short term or a longer term?
Yeah, I'm definitely open to reforms. I would never say that anything about Obamacare is perfect. You know, it's a Band-Aid on a broken healthcare system, and we need just to really have a serious conversation about the price of healthcare in this country, the price of prescription drugs, and our system is just not working for the average American. But the moment we're in is really just about whether people back home in Michigan who are on Obamacare are going to get that, in some cases, 600% increase in their bill for January 1st or not. But I'm definitely open to reforms, income caps, changes in policy. I don't think compromise is a dirty word. I'm open to talking to anybody who wants to have a serious conversation. But, you know, if we do those reforms, I'd expect to see my colleagues across the aisle put their money where their mouth is and actually vote for this legislation. You know, we're going to have an important vote on health care one way or another in December. And, you know, it's one thing to talk about caring about the price of health care. It's another thing to actually vote for it. So we'll see where people actually land on that.
Speaker Johnson indicated this week that he endorses the president's idea of sending money directly to Americans and going around the insurers. Do you think that is a starting point with Democrats in any capacity?
Well, I mean, the president has been busy cutting the government to save money, and I'm not sure where the money comes from to give people checks. He talked about giving people checks for tariff hikes. We're all experiencing higher prices for a lot of goods, especially heading into Christmas. And he's been talking about giving people checks for that too. There's not some big pot of money that's just sitting around that's free. If you care about the national debt, if you care about fiscal responsibility, writing checks to every American, I mean, everyone I know is just, that's going to be billions and billions of dollars. So I'd like to see the math on that. But I'm the first person to say, like, if there's an idea on how to reframe our healthcare system, I'm here for it because it's not working. And certainly for me, I think one of the things we have to talk about and start really getting our heads around is a public insurance option in addition to the other choices people have out there. I think that everyone deserves healthcare they can afford, and we should always be able to have some baseline level of care, whether you're in Michigan and you travel to Florida or you live in Kansas and you want to go visit New York. I want you to be covered nationwide by an affordable plan that's competitive with the other private plans. But that's a bigger reimagining that I believe has to happen because our system is broken on healthcare.
So does that idea look or mirror the Affordable Care Act? Because I know there are a lot of broad ideas. Republicans have for years been talking about repealing and replacing. Are there conversations happening between Democrats and Republicans about reimagining the Affordable Care Act as a whole?
I think, well, certainly for me, the Affordable Care Act, again, was built as a Band-Aid, right? And I think if we're reimagining healthcare, we should think bigger than just tweaks on the Affordable Care Act. That's where we are right now because, Democrats and Republicans are not acting in healthy ways and having great bipartisan conversations about these big issues. I have not heard from my Republican colleagues an idea of what comes next. I know that they don't like the Affordable Care Act. They talk about that all the time. The president for 5-7 years has been talking about repealing Obamacare, but they never have an idea of what comes next. So I will say very openly that Obamacare is far from perfect, needs major reform, but I'm not willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater until I know what's coming behind it, because I know what it's like for a loved one to get a terminal diagnosis and have zero insurance. And of all the things that I have, hard things that I've had to do in my life, nothing was harder than getting a terminal diagnosis for my mom when she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and she had let her health care lapse. And that panic that happens, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. And so we need to get our act together on health care writ large. But before that happens, I'm not going to cut Obamacare and just let people go without insurance again. 27 million more people off without insurance if that happens.
You guys are now racing or running up against the clock, you could say. Is it realistic to have some great reform conversation at this point with so many weeks left before that deadline? Or do you imagine, is it more realistic to extend what is in place right now?
Yeah. So it's interesting. There are a number of Republicans who have long had ideas on reform. They have bills. We have a lot of bipartisan bills. And I give people like Senator Cassidy, a Republican, real credit. You know, he's a doctor from prior life, and he has real bipartisan ideas that he's worked out with fellow senators on reform. I am super open to those ideas. And because there's been so many years that people in the Senate have been trying to deal with health care, there's actually a lot already written, you know, bills that are there. So I think it's just a matter of figuring out what are the 2 or 3 or 4 key things we're going to do, and then how do we get as many people supporting that bill as possible. We'd need, I think, 13 Republicans to vote with us in order to save people's health care for January 1st.
Are you optimistic about that prospect?
I think that's a big number. And I think that would entail a lot of my colleagues doing something very brave and contradicting the president. But I think because of how important healthcare is to their constituents, I really, really desperately hope they're open to it.
Yeah. Because of the shutdown, you could say there's a lot of attention on this issue. A Gallup poll recently showed that I believe 47% of Americans are anxious about what's going to happen with their health care next year. Can you provide any reassurance for Americans out there when it comes to this premium kind of cliff that everyone is staring at?
I'm just not going to BS people that it's all going to be sunshine and rainbows. I think that the government shutdown was because we're in a healthcare crisis and we knew that this deadline was looming. And we could not get from my Republican colleagues a firm commitment to do something about the price of healthcare. What we got was a vote. So now everyone in the Senate, all 100 members, will have to be on record. Now is the time, December of 2025, we have a chance to change the price of health care for people on January 1st, and people are going to have to decide on their own what they're going to do. But I'm not going to promise, I just don't believe in that, in promising people, you know, again, sunshine and rainbows, because my colleagues cut health care as a way to pay for tax cuts, and that has become a math problem for them. So I'm hopeful, but I'm not going to say it's a sure thing by a long shot.
If a compromise is not settled before that deadline and premiums do spike, will Democrats share some of the blame? Because this was something that they were fighting for when it came to the shutdown, and obviously a small group did concede and go ahead and reopen the government. If that were to happen, do Democrats share the blame?
Well, look, I think we're here because the big, beautiful bill that was signed into law on July 4th created and precipitated a health care crisis. It cut health care, Obamacare, Medicaid, it cut a bunch of different things so that they could pay for a tax cut for the most wealthy. And then in response, our hospitals and our private insurance are like, well, we're just going to charge more for the people who still have insurance. So everyone I know is either at risk of losing their health insurance or paying more for their insurance, including private insurance. So we're in that, you know, moment because that bill really changed healthcare policy and put us into this crisis. And look, I think Democrats and Republicans should be sitting down together and working on a bipartisan compromise, but I can't say with a straight face that, you know, as someone who didn't vote for the big, beautiful bill, that we're in this mess because of both sides. They put out their signature piece of legislation and they massively cut health care to pay for a tax cut. They got to live with the consequences.
Yeah. I know when you were in the House, you weren't shy about criticizing leadership there. What is your thoughts about how Senator Schumer led your caucus during that shutdown?
Yeah. You know, look, I think we had an election, was it 2 weeks ago now? And I think there were 2 big messages that came out of that night, and people need to hear those messages. Number one was that the cost of living and the threat to the American dream is still the number one issue. And it doesn't matter if you're in Michigan or Kansas or Manhattan, that's the galvanizing issue of our time. And then number two, people want a new generation of leadership. You know, we elected people, my good friends got elected governor to New Jersey and to Virginia. We had elections in New York, in Mississippi, in all these places. And people were willing to take the new over warmed over leftovers. And I think we need to hear that, Democrats and Republicans, and we ignore that at our peril. So I think for me, you know, there is certainly a difficult conversation being had on what's happening in this institution, the Senate. The Senate of 30 years ago is not the Senate of today. I wish it was. I'm new to the Senate. And it just isn't functioning the way that sort of traditional, genteel, processy body used to work. And we need to meet the moment and change with it.
Does that look like new leadership in the Senate?
I think certainly, like whether it's the House, the Senate, the White House, across the country, we need a new generation of leadership. And I've been saying this when it was Biden, right? And he was in the White House. I was saying it when we had Speaker Pelosi. Like, I just think it's a phenomenon that's going on across every institution I know. And again, people need to adapt and hear that.
Could we see you gun for a leadership position in the future? I know this is your freshman year, but
I'm a freshman, and you know, whether I like it or not, this is a place that's based on seniority. Years in service is how you move up the ladder, and I have my feelings about that. You know, I don't think that that's an ideal way of doing things. I think people should have to compete for things, but that means I'm probably not at the top of anyone's list for leader.